Donald Trump unveiled his economic plans at the Detroit Economic Club today. He spoke for almost 2 hours.
I think you're going to find some interesting things.
Let's just take the first 5 minutes of this speech and analyze what it was that he said, because there were so many lies just in the first 5 minutes that we wouldn't have time to unpack all of the propaganda and all of the lies that he presented over the entire 2 hours.
Both good and bad, but we make the bad into good. That's what we like to do.
We make the bad into good. Okay, that's an interesting place to start. What?
It was just announced that inflation came in substantially hotter than expected last month. Double what was predicted, with much of the gain coming from food prices going up.
Inflation is double what was predicted. Who said that? I mean, apart from you just making it up there and then, but what are you talking about? Inflation in the United States dropped last month to its lowest point since it first began surging more than 3 years ago because of a worldwide pandemic. Taken as a whole, the September figures show that inflation is already steadily easing back to the Fed's 2% target. That decline suggests the Fed will likely keep cutting its benchmark interest rate this year, with 2 quarter-point reductions in November and December expected by most economists. Not Donald Trump, though. On a positive note, apartment rental prices grew more slowly than last month, a sign that housing inflation is finally cooling, a long-awaited development that would provide relief to many consumers. Overall inflation last month was held down by a big drop in gas prices, which fell 4.1% from August to September.
Interest rates, as you know, are also a big factor. They're very high. They've gone from 2% when I was in office to 10% now, and you can't get the money. That means it's much higher than 10%.
Interest rates? What are you talking about? They were just cut. What does he even mean? Is he just going to say anything and hope that nobody notices? The Federal Reserve cut interest rates by 0.5 percentage point last month. But Donald Trump doesn't mention that. And where does he get 10% or more from? The US interest rate is 5%. You can get a 15-year mortgage for 4.85%. So what is over 10%? That's probably the rate that he can borrow money because lenders know that he is going to default on the loan. After inflation peaked in early 2022, the Federal Reserve repeatedly stated that its goal with aggressive interest rate hikes was to get inflation down to an annual target range of 2%. Well, it's almost there. Today's Consumer Price Index, measuring the cost of food, housing, gas, utilities, and other goods in the month of September, shows annual price growth at 2.4%. The most recent employment report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics showed U.S. hiring exploding past expectations in September. Instead of greater jobless numbers, the unemployment rate ticked down. Experts agree that the Fed can and should continue lowering interest rates. This all happened under Joe Biden's presidency, who fortunately was able to steady the ship after Donald Trump crashed the economy during the pandemic.
The fact is that the Federal Reserve brought the interest rates down a little too quickly. It was too big a cut, and everyone knows that was a political maneuver that they tried to do before the election, but they did the wrong thing. It was totally a political decision, and inflation has started to rise.
Oh, okay, so the Fed brought the rates down too quickly now. Well, most economists would disagree with that, but anyway, you just keep pretending that you're an authority when you've gone bankrupt 6 times, you've had dozens of failed businesses, and you've even lost your business license in New York because of fraud. Any American who is truly concerned about inflation should be much more worried about Donald Trump than Kamala Harris. Harris is far more serious about fighting inflation and helping households cope with the high cost of living. Donald Trump doesn't care. What's more, Trump's plan to impose steep tariffs on all imported goods will significantly push up prices and hit consumers hard, especially less wealthy consumers. I mean, he doesn't even know what his tariffs are. He says 10%, 20%, 50%, 1,000%. What does he even mean by that? There's no analysis, there's no projection, there's no financial planning. He's just saying random numbers really loudly in a kind of maniacal fashion and hopes that nobody will check.
I now know the game a little better. I had never been a politician before. I got to the White House. I said, I've never done this before. But
if Trump is elected and implements his tariffs and other plans, inflation will probably and quickly rise to an uncomfortable 6 to 9.3% per year from the current 2.5%, according to a respected think tank, with prices climbing a very painful 20% to 28% during Trump's 4 years in office. That means there's a good chance that inflation would rise more in a second Trump term than it has under Joe Biden. Not only that, economists say the higher prices caused by Trump's tariffs will cost the typical American household between $2,600 and $3,900 a year. Rather than focusing on Trump's criticisms about inflation, Americans should be celebrating the fact that inflation has significantly decreased, nearing 2% once again. When we take a clear look at what drove inflation in 2021 and 2022, we can identify two key causes. And no, Kamala Harris is not one of them. The first major cause was the COVID-19 pandemic. It forced the closure of thousands of factories worldwide. It severely disrupted supply chains, leading to skyrocketing prices on everything from cars to furniture, and this was happening right around the world. The second cause was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The conflict drove up global agricultural prices because Ukraine is a major exporter of grain and fertilizer. Additionally, the war sent oil and gas prices soaring, as Russia is a major energy supplier, and the war disrupted energy exports. There was also another significant factor contributing to inflation: corporate profiteering. Many companies exploited the situation, raising prices well beyond what was necessary. This greedflation resulted in record corporate profits, while consumers felt the squeeze. The Economic Policy Institute noted that inflated corporate profits were responsible for about a third of the price increases since the pandemic began. The reality is that the US economy is in solid shape, despite many people feeling frustrated by the higher prices compared to pre-pandemic levels. What many Americans may not realize is that wages have actually been increasing faster than prices, helping to offset some of the inflationary impact. Looking ahead, economists are more concerned about Donald Trump's potential impact on prices than anything to do with Vice President Harris. They fear that Trump's proposed tariffs could cause a spike in prices and spark a trade war that might push the US economy into a recession. Trump has been vocal about two major economic policies: significant tax cuts for the wealthiest 1% and corporations, and the imposition of steep tariffs, up to 20% on all imports, including items like TVs, shoes, and bananas, with a staggering 60% tariff on imports from China.
4 years ago, when I left office, we had no inflation. We had virtually, just think of it, we had virtually no inflation for the entire 4 years. So when people made money, that was really their money. It wasn't money that they have to give back to a source that they know nothing about, including government.
Trump claims that foreign companies will foot the bill for these tariffs, but economists consistently argue that this is completely inaccurate. In reality, American consumers will bear the cost through higher prices. Economists warn that a second Trump term could dangerously stoke inflation, driven by his tariffs, policies that would balloon the budget deficit, and his threats to limit the Federal Reserve's ability to control inflation. In fact, 16 Nobel Prize-winning economists have sounded the alarm, cautioning that Trump's policies could reignite inflation and have a destabilizing effect on the U.S. economy. Unlike Trump, Kamala Harris has a concrete plan to tackle rising costs. Recognizing the surge in housing prices, largely due to a shortage of new homes being built since 2008, Harris proposes an ambitious plan to build 3 million new housing units across the country. Additionally, she wants to offer first-time homebuyers a $25,000 down payment subsidy to make home ownership more accessible. To combat high grocery prices, Harris is committed to cracking down on price gouging by food suppliers and supermarket chains. She also aims to address the rising cost of prescription drugs, building on Biden's success in reducing insulin prices to $35 a month for seniors. She's also pushing for a groundbreaking initiative to subsidize childcare, ensuring that no family spends more than 7% of their income on childcare costs. While Donald Trump is busy making false claims, blaming Kamala Harris for inflation, it's actually his economic policies that threaten to drive inflation even higher. And by attacking Harris, he's diverting attention from the fact that his own plans would push prices and make things worse for American families.
China, I don't object. Look, President Xi was, and I would say is, a very good friend. We broke up a little bit. You know, the way friendships break up, a thing called the China virus broke us up. I think that's understandable, right? Cost the world about $50 trillion and tens of millions of lives all over the world. I think that's a reason. But no, I've always had a very good relationship with him. Very, very strong, smart man.
One of the most significant yet less talked about legacies of Donald Trump is the dramatic increase in the national debt during his time in office. This financial burden will have long-lasting consequences, placing a heavy load on future generations, our children and grandchildren, who'll be left to deal with the aftermath. Under Trump, the national debt surged by nearly $7.8 trillion. Now, to put that in perspective, this increase is almost double the amount that Americans owe in student loans, car loans, credit card debt, and all other non-mortgage debt combined. This translates to about $23,500 in additional federal debt for every person in the United States, courtesy of Donald Trump's mismanagement of the economy. In terms of the annual deficit, Trump's administration oversaw one of the largest increases in history, ranking third in terms of growth relative to the size of the U.S. economy. This significant rise in debt will be a lasting mark of his presidency, complicating efforts to manage the nation's finances for decades to come. Economists widely agree that significant deficit spending was necessary during the COVID crisis to prevent an economic collapse. However, the federal financial situation under Trump had already become precarious well before the pandemic hit. Despite a booming economy that he inherited from Barack Obama and historically low unemployment rates, a major contributor to this problem was Trump's 2017 tax cut, which combined with a lack of meaningful spending controls led both the deficit and national debt to skyrocket. So when the COVID-19 pandemic struck and the U.S. needed to inject over $3 trillion in stimulus to stabilize the economy, there was no financial cushion left. Trump's policies had already depleted much of the fiscal flexibility, leaving little room for error when the country faced this unprecedented crisis.
So here is the deal that I will be offering to the world, to companies outside of our world, big companies, powerful companies that have become powerful because we were stupid. We were stupid. We allowed them to come in and raid and rape our country. That's what they did. Oh, he used the word rape. That's right. I used the word rape. They raped our country.
A report from the Nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a non-profit group that focuses on fiscal issues, projected that the disgraced former president's proposals would increase the national debt by $7.5 trillion through 2035. It's normal for a country to run up debt and to service it, but Donald Trump has no idea what he's talking about regarding fiscal planning. He has no experience. He's only ever borrowed from banks and increasingly unscrupulous lenders. He famously stiffs every contractor that he employs by renegotiating their bill down after they did the work. He's a con man, a grifter.
I lose teleprompters probably 5%, 10% of the time. Sometimes I'll be in front of 50,000 people. I'll lose a teleprompter. You got to wing it. You know what you got to do.
His 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act made sweeping changes to America's tax laws. He signed it into law, and it was approved with only Republican support in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And it permanently slashed corporate tax rates and changed the way the nation taxes the profits of U.S. multinational corporations, the only group that Donald Trump really cares about. Before the 2017 tax law was passed, Trump and his top economic advisors claimed that its benefits would trickle down, leading to significant gains for U.S. workers and their families and the broader economy. Trickle-down economics is a fallacy. It was invented by the people at the top to give the impression to their workers that their success would trickle down, except it never did. All it did was keep people quiet and keep people hopeful.
But we're going to bring it down, and we brought it down to 21. That made us competitive. Not the best at all, but competitive. Now I'm bringing it down to 15%.
Looking back, there is little evidence now that Donald Trump's corporate tax cuts delivered the promised economic growth or improved the well-being of most American workers. Instead, the law primarily benefited the wealthy and large profitable corporations, resulting in significant tax breaks for the richest Americans. This further exacerbated income inequality while also shrinking federal reserves that could have been used to address important national issues such as infrastructure, healthcare, and education. 3 things that the Donald Trump administration cared nothing for.
A lot of countries don't like me. I get always bad publicity. This one doesn't like me. Germany doesn't like me. A lot of countries don't like me. They say, who do you like better? Sleepy Joe Biden or Trump? Oh, I like Biden better.
If you think your finances were better under Trump, think again. That was Barack Obama's economy. Trump never mentions the pandemic coming along and worldwide inflation and supply chain issues and price gouging. He leaves all that stuff out. He just talks about the economy that he inherited from Obama's administration and takes the credit for it.
See, that's the real threat to democracy, stupid people. That's the threat. Our biggest threat to democracy is stupid people.
Trump tells you what he wants you to remember. And because he says it over and over again, some people have started to believe him.
I'm not going to buy one of those suckers.
I'm Anthony Davis. You can catch me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with Midas Touch.